Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and thank you for stopping by. Let me start with probably the biggest issue in the markets today. JP Morgan, a delay would be in line with our base case of delayed tariff increases in a phase one deal by the first quarter of 2020, but elevated uncertainty persists. Notwithstanding Peter Navarro's comments where he was pouring cold water on the whole thing, I do suspect we're going to kick this can down the road. I don't think the president fancies an almighty sell-off in the US stock indices ahead of the Christmas season. So the renminbi, as I've said previously, is being used as a shock absorber and a very precise first responder to Trump, and for now the Chinese are being quite well behaved, 703, 55, 60, and we'll have to keep an eye on that because it is the most important currency to watch right now. Home Thoughts, the Financial Times, is talking about saving the African grey parrot. The first thing to know about the African grey parrot is it's not grey, not entirely at least. The medium-sized bird, which lives in forests in West and Central Africa, has electric red tail feathers that make it a target for poachers who use the plumage for ceremonial headdresses. Its body parts are used in traditional medicine, a highly intelligent animal capable of mimicking human speech, and which can live in captivity up to the age of 60. It has also been a sought-after pet since biblical times, retails for £1,000. I had a parrot called Basel, an African grey parrot, when I was a teenager. And 30 years later, I was at dinner at somebody's house, and we'd stayed on in Mombasa, and it was about 1 a.m, and Iqbal turned to me and said, "Ali Khan, do you know we've got your parrot?" And I'd forgotten that my mum had given away the parrot. And he said, "He's very ornery, no one can sort of approach him or anything." And at 1 a.m, I went into his kitchen, and there was Basel. And I have to tell you, he was so happy to see me. It was just extraordinary. It was just wonderful. And I can't tell you how intelligent Basel was and is. A Warholian David Datuna, this is Hervé Gogo, so it's not like, again, vandalism, it was art performance from me, and absolutely, I'm not sorry. And as Art Basel themselves, well, the art gallery Perotin, the spokesman Lucien Terra told the Herald that the banana is the idea. And Datuna did not destroy the artwork. Indeed, what a story. And then it took an Epstein wormhole as well subsequently. They say in forests, animals can hear tigers roar up to kilometers, and that is what terrifies them. Listen to believe. Here in an old video at Sundarban Tiger Reserve, the tiger is registering its presence. That's from Parveen Kaswan, who I've recently discovered. And this is from him as well. The dark figure, they say it is quite possible you will notice nothing in the wild, but it is quite sure you will be noticed by many. And we also came across some elephants in the early evening at Mazima Springs, and we'd taken the camera crew with us. And if you've got 8 minutes, do watch it, because we're just taking a walk, and then suddenly this huge herd arrives, and it's in the half-light dusk. It's quite extraordinary, and it was an experience I'll never forget. Professor Mark Maslin, Lies, Manipulation and Human Evolution, How Humans Beat Their Competitors. This is in an interview with Afshin Rattansi, and it's really very interesting if you've got time. Last night I went out, I was invited by Glenn Morenji, and I had a lovely dinner, I must say, at Mr. Yao, which is a new restaurant here in Nairobi at Kenrail Towers. And it was a lovely dinner, delicious food and drink, and excellent company. The duck was particularly good, as was the dessert. Political reflections. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was in the White House the day that Trump was impeached for seeking foreign interference in US elections. Chew on that. That's from P. da Costa. And indeed, took me back to December 2016. We have a deviate tomahawk. The first thing I said then is plausible deniability. And the second thing is non-linearity, and you're not being very plausible, you're not being very deniable or non-linear by turning up on that very occasion. As I said in that article, Putin has proven himself an information master, and his adversaries are his information victims. And I take you back to Lavrov's comments: if it looks like a terrorist, if it acts like a terrorist, if it walks like a terrorist, if it fights like a terrorist, it's a terrorist, right? Geldorf, Aung Suu Kyi took the greatest prize humans can give to another and then becomes one of the great ethnic cleansers on the planet. And really, I think she's got a nerve. I don't know how these guys can sleep at night. They could be fighting malaria or funding cancer research or feeding the hungry with these kind of massive and obscene dollar amounts instead of self-funding vanity and pointless presidential races. That is from Mehdi Hassan. Michael Bloomberg is nearing $100 million in TV ad spending through just 5 weeks in the presidential race, added a total of $36.7 million to TV ad reservations yesterday, bringing total TV spend through the week of through the week of 17th Dec to $96.8 million. That's David Wright on CNN. And that took me back to Ecclesiastes. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. Mark Curtis, in an interview which I hadn't seen with Afshin Rattansi, again, episode 691, gives a very truthful dissection of the UK's foreign policy across the entire globe. And ultimately, I think it's going to be a hung parliament in point of fact, but I think Corbyn, had he been more subtle and less of an oppositionist, in particular to the Chagos Islands and NATO, he might have won this election. Better a nationalised sausage than a chlorinated chicken. That's what I say, George Galloway. My last article on this UK election, which is tomorrow, was the Lotos-Eaters and the UK election, and why I chose the Lotos-Eaters, which is a poem by Lord Alfred J. Tennyson, was because everyone is making promises they have no chance of fulfilling, in my opinion. YouGov's new MRP poll predicts the Tories will gain a majority of just 28. This is down from a predicted majority of 68 in the last YouGov MRP poll at the end of November. With tactical voting and voter turnout likely to be crucial, there's everything still to play for. And it's looking very close to me, because I don't think Boris has waged a clever campaign. He might have thought it is. It's very logo-driven. Let's get Brexit done, let's get it done. But other issues have crept in, and he's, I think, looked on the back foot for quite a while now. Sterling fell close to one big figure on that YouGov poll. Cutting the Tory seat lead to 28 is a reminder of how sensitive Sterling is to any outcome other than a solid Tory majority. That's V Patel FX. Let's take a look at where Sterling is now, 130, 136. but it was just shy of 132 when that poll came out. 50% probability priced in for a 40-seat win. Hung Parliament, he's saying, sterling falls to 128. I think it'll fall further. A Kensington resident sums up his views on the UK election on BBC Newsnight. He says it's a choice between a lying buffoon and a Marxist. Reporters are, who are you going to vote for? The lying buffoon, he said. Let's turn to the currency markets. Euro 110.84, dollar index 97.576, Japanese yen 108.73, Swiss franc 0.9849, the pound recovering back 131.36. When I was earlier in the morning, it was 131.15. Australian dollar, which is highly sensitive to the trade news, is at 0.6825, undervalued in my opinion, as is the New Zealand dollar, which is trading at 0.6534, and I would like to buy that actually. India rupee 70.8595, South Korean won 1194.76, the Rial 414.67, so that's recovered from all-time lows at 426. Egyptian pound 16.1396, and the South African rand softening 14.7689. Dollar index, as I said, 97.568. I continue to expect it to soften. Euro dollar, this chart is from FX Pip Titan, who is a tremendous resource on Twitter on the currency markets. Euro dollar 110.83. Tesla and Pure Energy Minerals Canada both showed great interest in having a direct stake in Bolivian lithium, according to Vijay Prashad, but they could not make a deal that would take into consideration the parameters set by the Morales government. Morales himself was a direct impediment to the takeover of the lithium fields by the non-Chinese transnational firms. He had to go. After the coup, Tesla's stock rose astronomically. It did. Commodity markets, the best performing commodity, and this is from the Marketeer, has been palladium. And also, look at this chart from T Commodity of the Bloomberg Agriculture Index. He says it's bottoming, and you remember that food FAO food index, which has risen about 10% 12 months through last month. So that's probably supporting this index. Gold, let's take a look at that. 1466.2. We haven't regained 1500. I think we're going to need a major fallout in the trade war to get us back above there. Oil fell from a 12-week high as report shows that the US stockpile expanded. We're currently at $58.81. Aramco's IPO means that Saudi Arabia's market cap will be on a par with Germany's. That's just amazing. And then really, it's limit up today. It's been a tremendous performance and a job well done, in part because they restricted the float, but nevertheless, and then they got, their own nationals and the GCC to buy it, which was a clever way of making sure the demand side was muscular. And I think they've done quite well, frankly. Emerging markets last night at midnight, India's tryst with bigotry and narrow-minded exclusion was confirmed as the CAB was passed in the Lok Sabha. Our forefathers gave their lifeblood for our freedom. That's Priyanka Gandhi. In that freedom is enshrined the right to equality and the right to freedom of religion. As I wrote, I think it was last month, that the politics of ethnocratic nationalism are a bust. From India to China to Sri Lanka to the US, wherever you care to look, I really think it's putting tremendous pressure on these economies. I go back to that fabulous article in the New Yorker, fabulous not because of what it said, but because of its scholarship and its journalism and its wide sweep of Narendra Modi, who said, if we raise the self-respect and morale of 50 million Gujaratis, he said, the schemes of Alis, Malis and Jamalis will not be able to do us any harm. In the same article, the accelerated growth was a fantastically crafted fiction, according to Prasad. Economic growth has now fallen for 6 consecutive quarters. GDP figure is the weakest recorded under Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who first swept to power 5 years ago, promising to take India's economy to new heights and create millions of jobs every year. Well, he didn't manage that, did he? Indian business breaks ranks as economic strain takes its toll. Indian industrialists tend to be cautious in publicly criticizing their country's political leaders and policy direction, influenced maybe by that adage, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Rahul Bajaj, the 81-year-old chairman of the Bajaj Group, is an exception. Grandson of one of the independence leader Mahatma Gandhi's closest confidants, the industrialist has a reputation for being outspoken. His public remarks are often seen as a barometer of corporate India's wider sentiment, which few others are willing to express. That is why Mr. Bajaj raised hackles in New Delhi last week when he publicly suggested that Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has created an atmosphere of fear with a chilling effect on the business community that had once cheered Mr. Modi's rise to national power. Mr. Modi's closest lieutenant Amit Shah sought to dispel these concerns. Nobody needs to be afraid, Mr. Shah, the Home Minister said. But if such an atmosphere as you are talking about has been created, we will also have to try and improve that. Ms. Sitharaman advised other potential corporate malcontents that there was always a better way to seek an answer than spreading one's own impressions, which can hurt the national interest. Private industry, and this is the FT, must be part of that discourse. Mr. Modi's government must recognize that silencing the flow of honest policy feedback, whether intentionally or not, is ultimately self-defeating. Let's turn to sub-Saharan Africa. This Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia went to receive the Nobel Prize. He said war is the epitome of hell for all involved. He served as a radio operator in the Ethiopian army. I know because I've been there and back, he said. He was the only survivor of an artillery attack on his unit during the war. I know because I'd been there and back. He's 43, became Africa's youngest leader when he was appointed Prime Minister in March 2018, and immediately announced a swathe of political and economic reforms. We understood our nations are not enemies, speaking about Eritrea. Instead, we were victims of the common enemy called poverty. We recognized that while our two nations were stuck on old grievances, the world was shifting rapidly and leaving us behind. Born on August 15, 1976 in the small town of Beshasha in Ethiopia's Oromia state, Abiy holds a master's degree in business administration and transformational leadership and a PhD in traditional conflict resolution. He served as Lieutenant Colonel in the Ethiopian National Defense Force and acting director of the country's cybersecurity intelligence agency and science and technology minister. You have chosen a path that we believe will consolidate peace and prosperity in your country. You represent a new generation of African leaders who realize that armed conflict and ethnic hostilities must be resolved by peaceful means. Abiy is the second successive African recipient in 2018, Congolese Dr. Denis Mukwege, was the joint winner of the award for his work against sexual violence. I've written about him twice. The second time was on the 14th of October this year, when I said, on the occasion of him being awarded the Nobel Prize, I was quoting an article I wrote in July 2018, when I said these 90 or so days represent the most consequential arrival of an African politician on the African stage since Mandela walked out of prison, blinking in the sunlight, and constructed his rainbow nation. And I'm glad that the Nobel team see it the same way. I also said he faces a fiendishly complicated task, fending off the centripetal forces which are tearing Ethiopia apart. The Prime Minister, who has a singular self-belief in his destiny, is a Virillian and a 21st century African leader. And then I was quoting Virilio, whoever controls the territory possesses it. Possession of territory is not primarily about laws and contracts, but first and foremost a matter of movement and circulation. I called him Gladwellian, to create one contagious movement. You often have to create many small movements first. Look at the world around you. It may seem like an immovable, implacable place. It is not. With the slightest push in just the right place, it can be tipped. And I was talking, this is the article after he'd been in power for 90 days, crisscrossed the country, ended a state of emergency, released thousands of political prisoners, forward relations with Eritrea, bagged $1 billion from the UAE, announced a dramatic economic about turn in matters, language and linguistics. He tapped into a Nelson Mandela 1994 mood. And I said I was watching the France-Argentina game and the arrival of Kylian Mbappe on the world stage at the tender age of 19. I recalled watching the whirling dervishes of the Mevlevi order on a night of a full moon in Konya. And I thought what they all have in common with Abiy Ahmed is speed and velocity. Virilio calls it dromology. And that speed, the speed at which something happens changes its essential nature. And I think that's essentially what he's done. Virilio argues that the traditional feudal fortified city disappeared because of the increasing sophistication of weapons and possibilities for warfare. For Virilio, the concept of siege warfare became rather a war of movement, and Abiy Ahmed moved at lightning speed. The old guard is like the old traditional feudal fortified city. However, there are many challenges. FX reserves remain low, exports remain low, but he's announced an economic pivot, and I think he's made some strong steps forward on that front as well. Apparently, according to some friend of mine who's in Addis, he's very close to Vice President Pence. Global military powers are expanding their military presence in the area. Terrorist and extremist groups also seek to establish a foothold. We do not want the Horn to be a battleground for superpowers, he said, nor a hideout for the merchants of terror and brokers of despair and misery, he added. 6th of August last year, I was writing about how China, the BRI initiative, the Gulf countries who now appear to see the Horn of Africa as their hinterland, Japan and India to a lesser degree, are all jostling for optimal geo-economic positioning. Ethiopia may be one of the world's fastest growing economies, but it's got some serious underlying problems. Its annual inflation rate now is above 20%. That's from Habesh via Paul Wallace. The former Angolan president, Jose Eduardo dos Santos, will probably be asked to testify in court after his son and 3 others who are accused of embezzlement and money laundering said they were just following his orders. That's brilliant. The crimes are non-existent because the accused acted on the orders of the executive, lawyers for the 4 defendants said in a statement to the court, according to Angola's state-owned news agency Angop. Jose Filomeno appeared in court both Monday and Tuesday, but wasn't required to speak. My article over the weekend was time to big up the dosage of Quaaludes, and I was talking about the incoming debt-related crash that I'm forecasting pretty much across the continent. I was touching on, Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, and Zambia in particular, where the currency had hit a record low last week. Well, it's rebounded. If you want the definition of a dead cat bounce, this will surely be it. The Bank of Zambia has responded by raising the reserve ratio for commercial lenders to 9% from 5% effective December 23. They've already raised the key lending rate and increased the cost of overnight lending. I think these efforts will be short-lived because they've got no money left in the larder, and they've blown the cash, essentially. As I said in that article, quoting Vice President Inonge Wina, the Kwacha's depreciation is regrettable, apparently. Uganda will spend as much as a fifth of government revenue on interest payments in this financial year, the IMF has warned. That's equivalent to what countries that are close to or in debt distress spend on servicing credit, according to the IMF's country representative, Clara Mira. While the country remains at low risk of debt distress, there are vulnerabilities and interest payments are high, Mira said. The assessment that Uganda is at a low risk of debt distress is based on assumptions that its infrastructure investments will start paying off, revenue will improve, and planned oil exports begin in 2023. Well, with the travails of Tullow, I'm not so sure that's on the cards anymore. I like this from Debbie Just Does. I phoned Eskom today and asked to speak to generators. They said, sorry, no generators here. I said, don't you think it's time you got some? They put the phone down. Ramaphosa South Africa reported minus 0.6 Q3 2019 GDP. They're now reducing perks for top politicians and may do away with some management posts in the civil service as it tries to bring the ballooning wage bill under control. South African All Share is up 5.08% so far this year. Dollar rand at 14.75, which has been very sticky around 14.60. Several podcasts and it's just been hanging around there, but it's now beginning to soften. Very high correlation actually with load shedding. Egyptian pound 16.1675, EGX 30 up 3.63%, Nigerian All Share down 16.06%, Ghana Stock Exchange down 10.52%. Africa's Amazon hopeful Jumia retreats from big expansion. Jumia will close its business in Rwanda just weeks after it exited Cameroon and Tanzania. In the latest sign of retrenchment for the one-time unicorn whose share price has fallen nearly 90% from its high after listing in Wall Street in April. The co-chief executive Sasha Poinonek said the exits were routine as the company reassesses its markets, products and services. He noted that in the past it had left countries such as Mozambique and closed its ride-hailing business on Tuesday. Jumia also said it is in effect shutting its travel website. Jumia listed on the New York Stock Exchange to great fanfare in April, becoming the first Africa-focused startup worth more than $1 billion. Shares peaked at $49.77 weeks after their debut, but have steadily fallen to $5.96, giving it a market cap of just $458.3 million, about a tenth of its all-time high. If I want an iPhone, Jumia will say it takes 21 days, and Amazon will send it in a week. They will remove the VAT and deliver it straight to my door, said tech investor, CEO of Nigeria's Diamond Bank. Small businesses on Instagram are beginning to eat into Jumia by doing things faster, cheaper, and with a sense of security. People are willing to buy on Instagram because when you go to Instagram, they see pictures of people they know wearing the clothes. There's not that social aspect to it on Jumia, which is more transactional. Coming to Kenya, Fitch Ratings affirmed Kenya's debt rating at B+, outlook remains stable. That's on Bloomberg via Money Academy. The Bloomberg 50 guests and honorees applaud James Mwangi of Equity Bank for his achievements as a banker, philanthropist and champion for dignified work for all Africans, tweeted Zain Verji. Equity Bank has been expanding across the continent and I think actually is probably my top banking pick here in Kenya. Kenya's coffee crop nosedives due to high temperatures. Rising temperatures are scorching plants, making them susceptible to diseases such as coffee leaf rust. Now we see diseases that we never saw before, said Mutisia, 67, his dark brown eyes tinged with the blue of old age. Average Kenyan temperatures have risen by 0.3 degrees per decade since 1985, according to USAID. More erratic rainfall is reducing quality and yields. In the 1960s, Kenya averaged one storm day, more than 50 millimeters in 24 hours per year, said Joseph Kimemia. In 2017, there were 5 storm days. That damages fragile roots and throws off the ripening cycle. Kenya produces only 0.5% of global coffee, but plays an outsized role in the high-quality market as the Champagne region for coffee, said Matthew Harrison. Kenya's coffee production is tumbling. The US Department of Agriculture forecasts the 2019-2020 harvest will hit a 57-year low. Nairobi All Share is up 14.04%, the NSE20 is down 8.25%, and finally we got major flooding everywhere. This is Samburu, Ewaso, Nyiro River, with Kipsing and Pukua Lugas, normally dry riverbeds, flowing into it. Lots of rain, and we're staying in the camp today. That's from Ewaso Lions, but this is symptomatic of what's going on across the country. Thank you for stopping by, I'm always grateful.